Exhaustion of the reactive mind apparently leaves many circuits and much potential in a state of new availability. This is noted in the temporary euphorias which result from the exhaustion of single engrams. This temporary euphoria generally collapses as new engrams are approached in the reactive mind, since the general body tone is reduced and the analytical mind is being confronted with new emergency appeals from various portions of the body. When the last engram, and where necessary, engramic type of lock is exhausted from the reactive mind, and therefore the entire organism and the memory banks, the resultant charge can be compared to a reversed polarity. Laughter is rejection. Violent laughter may often occur, as these charges change in the reactive mind and as those circuits are cleared by the analytical mind, which is flicking out its locks. The term clear is used because it is common parlance in the field of computers. The analytical mind, when the reactive mind has been restimulated and exhausted by artificial means, instantly clears itself. This can be considered to make new circuits and computations available. The action does not change in any slightest degree the basic personality of the individual, but delivers to that personality a clear mind, relieved of harmful emotional content, and an organism which is no longer anxiously telegraphing information about false but nevertheless real pain. It is literally true the analytical mind itself is incapable of error. Its only error is introduced by erroneous data received from its observation of engrams at work. In a clear, complete accuracy, enormous imagination, renewed dreaming power, since an aberrated individual apparently loses his ability to dream in inverse ratio to the number of engrams he collects, and above all, the basic dynamic, the four dynamics, and purposes are entirely rehabilitated in full force. The basic purpose of an individual is established at a very early age, and is apparently residual in the analytical mind. In a clear, this purpose comes into full and complete being. His problems no longer have the added complexity of false data, false only in that it was observed as correct, whereas it was false in the reactive mind, and the analytical mind increases markedly in intelligence. It returns to its ability to command the entire organism and the entities which it has in charge, and can resolve with fantastic accuracy and speed, modified only by its educational data recallable from the memory files. Discovering the health of the organism to be immeasurably increased, the glandular activity to be normal or returning to normal, and the capabilities of the organism to be far in excess of what the organism once supposed they were, the analytical mind can begin with great efficiency to perform its proper function. The happiness and pleasurable observation of life, incident in childhood, comes to the adult with the added enhancement of the ability to concentrate, and with the data of long experience. In a clear, the memory files and the analytical mind contain only valid and useful data and circuits. Any individual who contains in his reactive mind an experience of an attempted abortion, or who contains any engramic data related to the necessity of retaining something, if that suggestion be indefinite, seeks to retain his engrams, and will often justify such a retention, since justification for the conduct of the organism is necessary by the analytical mind, which must not permit the organism to remain in social danger, with the comment that the dynamic results from these engramic situations. The confusion results from the observation that necessity brings about an address of the analytical mind to new problems. The necessities of the past are not forgotten in a clear, but the false necessities are recognized and eradicated. It has not been resolved what part punishment plays in the formation of a sensitive analytical mind, but it has been resolved that the removal of the reactive mind, which is to say the removal of physically painful experience from the life of an individual, immeasurably increases both his dynamic force and his intelligence. The value of a reactive mind to the analyzer is exactly 0. Chapter 14. The Clear. The actual operation of the mind, the delineation and measurement of its purposes, as well as its dynamics, belongs properly in the field of dynamic Dianetics. However, the auditor must understand the condition of the clear. When an individual has had his reactive mind exhausted so that he is no longer victimized by erroneous information, his analytical mind, in which resides the I, becomes an integration with the entire organism. As an illustration of this, when the auditor is seeking the basic engram, he will find that the analytical mind, which contains only locks on the engrammic content of the reactive mind, will observe that the I is exteriorly observing the incident in which the organism once took part, until the basic or the basic's immediate chain is reached. This aspect of exterior observation is symptomatic of the disintegrated personality, and is present ordinarily in all aberrated individuals until the basic engram itself is reached, at which time the individual will find himself within himself, feeling his own pains, and participating as himself in the incident. It was during this basic engram that he first began to separate into the illusion of two or more individuals. In this wise, all aberrated individuals are split personalities, which is to say, unintegrated personalities. The analytical mind has had its circuits jammed with a great deal of extraneous information and erroneous data, furnished by the reactive mind, and made to serve as a basic purpose to the analytical mind. These purposes, as furnished by the reactive mind, are of the character of positive suggestions of timeless duration, which, when restimulated by perceptions in the environment of the individual, become as new personalities. Actually, it is not even of interest to the auditor how many personalities the awake, aberrated individual has assumed or can manifest. In the basic engram, he will find that the personality is integrated, that the individual is within himself. And by following up by careful steps the engram chain along any and all dynamics, the auditor will continually reintegrate the individual until he is at last in present time as an integrated being, the analytical mind, the I, being in entire command and possession of the individual. As the analytical mind also contains the basic personality of the individual for purposes of this illustration, and as that basic personality is good and does obey all the dynamics implicitly, and is the personality with which the individual will be most happy and successful, the auditor need pay no attention to the number of times that personality has been split or depressed, beyond his initial diagnosis, which will permit him to reach the basic engram. The basic engram is quite locatable, actually, since it will respond very easily to this therapy, in addition to containing the individual as himself, feeling his own pains and consistently within himself throughout the recountings. In an aberrated personality, the basic engram is most usually prenatal, and requires considerable patience and development in order to again approach the time track, and become available to the analytical mind, and so become exhausted. When he has approached the tone 4 of the basic personality, or even before he has approached it, the auditor will ordinarily discover that his preclear is beginning to laugh. The laughter will often appear very hysterical, since it is the laughter of relief. Laughter is apparently rejection, and this laughter is the analytical mind finding at length the falsity of the information which it was forced to use in its computations. Not only will the analytical mind force out of its circuits with such laughter all the erroneous information, it will also break automatically all the entirely mentally painful incidents related to that engram or to that engram chain. Even during the breaking of the basic engram, this laughter may often be found to approach the hysterical. This can be explained as a reversal of charge, as the analytical mind discovers the unworthiness of the engrammic content. After the first engram chain was broken, preclears have been found to laugh for several hours as they were paced up and down their time track looking for locks. These locks often vanish so swiftly they cannot be recounted. Such is the power of the analytical mind. The laughter is not necessarily part of the clearing process, but unless laughter is present, the basic engram most certainly has not been reached. If the engram which the auditor considers the basic has been lifted to a certain degree, and laughter has not resulted, it is not the basic engram, and an earlier incident removed from the time track must be located. So great is the power and fantastic ability of the analyzer, that part of the I which can pose to itself its own problems on imaginary environments, and evolve entirely original and heretofore unimagined problems and solutions, that it can clear automatically all the future locks from the moment of the engram's receipt without further address by the auditor, beyond some prompting with the engrammic words. The clear is no longer being multi-commanded, but is integrated under the competent command of the basic personality. His analytical mind has had to form various complex, intricate, and strange circuits in order to cope with the organism's aberrated belief in the dangers inherent in certain restimulators. As soon as the basic engram has been reached, and its immediate chain exhausted, the analytical mind will begin to exhaust itself of all pertinent information and data. Accompanying engrams will achieve a similar result. The definition of a clear is that he is no longer interested in his own mind. He extroverts rather than introverts. His analytical mind no longer makes errors in simple computations, but can, with its new area which has been released by the locks, thus increasing the intelligence of the individual immeasurably, resolve problems it could not heretofore approach. The clear is not the product of destroyed personalities, but is the integration of the very best and the happiest portion of the individual. It is an error to suppose that any personality has been killed. Painful moments in the pre-clear's life have been exhausted, and certain individuals whom the pre-clear has dramatized, if they were painful to or antagonistic to the individual, are no longer present. But the basic personality is rehabilitated in its fullest and most intelligent and purposeful extent. The creation of a clear depends on restoring to the individual his self-determinism. The analytical mind and the I are fully capable of self-determinism. The doctrine of automatic determinism is false, erroneous, and degrading. The clear may be interested in clearing other individuals, since that is a portion of his four dynamics, but he will cease to be interested in the condition of his own mind the moment it is smoothly workable and in command of the organism. That mind can then solve the organism's problems in the environment, can solve the environment, can solve the problems of the entities which the organism has in its charge, and can, in short, command and create at will. When an engram has vanished, it can no longer be recalled along the engrammic track of the individual, and the incident is stored in the memory banks as having been recounted to the auditor. The character of the clear is best delineated in the auditor's code. Every individual has his own basic personality, and at the age of 2 has formed his entire purpose for life. The reactive mind has only succeeded in substituting false and detrimental personalities and in warping the purpose of the individual. It has not in any degree injured the analytical mind. Whenever an individual possesses an engram chain which makes the suggestion that he must not get rid of something, he will attempt to hold on to his aberrations. He is reacting solely to an engrammic command, and is thinking in identities. A clear is not confused with such matters, for he well recognizes with the fabulous power of his analyzer that painfully inflicted exterior determinisms were of no aid to the organism. Every engram contains the perceptic that the analytical mind must be cut out of the circuit and nullified. This comes about because the engram was received into the reactive mind in moments when great shock or poisons, even when in the form of drugs, deadened or momentarily cut out of the circuit the analytical mind. That the analytical mind can be cut out of the circuit is in itself a survival mechanism, since any organism as sensitive and as complex as the analytical mind must, perforce, be equipped with some fuse mechanism. This then becomes one of the perceptics of organic sensation in any engram. Therefore, when engrams are being dramatized, the analytical mind is instantly lowered in potential even beyond the lowered potential which permitted the engram to become reactive. This is the character of convulsions and so forth. It is therefore possible for some chronically restimulated engram to hold the analytical mind in a suppressed state, such as chronic shock, chronic poisoning, or chronic sleep. As these and other things which tend to nullify the analytical mind or reduce its potential are restimulated into dramatization by restimulators in the environment of the individual, the potential of the analytical mind is reduced to a point where it may often appear that the individual is in a chronic trance state. A complete trance of the analytical mind and a chronic restimulation into dramatization of an engram are the commonest forms of insanity. But any series of engrams contains as part of its restimulative suggestion the reduction of the analytical mind in its activity. This is a soldered circuit from the engram. Therefore, when a clear is obtained, the analytical mind is for the first time fully alert. Its circuits are cleared, and it can form new thought patterns and can obtain an accuracy of computation which is amazing to watch. The clear is the entire being in rationality. He will not harm anything unless rational observation of a situation and the requirements of a society demand that such a thing be harmed. A clear is relaxed in a fully conscious state, untroubled by aberrated fears. He is as fully aware of the world around him as an ecstatic child would be, and is possessed of a rationality based upon his experience. Painful experience is stored reliably and accurately in his banks as reliable data, but engramic and unconscious experience is eradicated as unreliable and erroneous data. Freudian psychology addressed the problem of attempting to clear an individual through examining and rationalizing the lock content of the analytical mind. Considerable alleviation may be attempted after a considerable labor by any such method, but the engrams still remain, and the engrams can still be restimulated, thus forming a new problem for such a therapy. Treatments which tend to blast locks out of the analytical mind tend to further reduce the dynamics of the individual and destroy the basic personality. For dynamic alone may hold an individual imbalance, and dynamic alone makes him valuable to himself and his community. A clear is rehabilitated in his dynamics, and these will be found to be strengthened immeasurably. He is better able to solve the problems of his environment, and has available to him more circuits for such computation. He is able to control the organism and its various functions, and is an integrated unit. He is rational and constructive. His self-determinism has been rehabilitated to the final degree, and he is no longer subjected to reaction from environmental stimuli, which is characteristic of the base and fumbly animal over which man has triumphed after fully 1,000,000 years of evolution. Part 3. Clearing. Chapter 15. Engram Chains. More than one engram chain will be found in every aberree. When he becomes a preclear, the auditor does well to discover the earliest engram chain. It is not always possible to do this with accuracy, since a preclear is sometimes in such a nervous condition that he cannot be worked on his basic chain, but must be alleviated in a greater or lesser degree by the exhaustion of a later and more available chain. This last, however, is not the usual case. The auditor should clearly understand certain working principles and definitions. By an engram is meant a moment of unconsciousness accompanied by physical pain and conceived antagonism. There are two classes of engrams. One is the basic engram, which is the earliest engram on an engram chain. The other is the engram lock, which is an engram of the same character and kind, on the same dynamic as the basic engram of the chain. An engram chain is then composed of a basic engram and a series of engram locks. Engram chains also contain ordinary locks, which are instances of mental anguish more or less known to the analytical mind. These are often mistaken by the preclear for the cause of his conduct. A true engram is unknown to the conscious computer of the preclear, but underlies it as a false datum on which is erected almost equally unknown engram locks and an enormous number of locks. In order to release an engram chain, it is vital and absolutely necessary to discover the engrams of that chain. An individual may have more than one engram chain, but he has a basic engram chain. This must be cleared as soon as possible after auditing is engaged on the preclear. When an engram is discovered by the auditor, he must examine the aspect of it to determine whether or not it is the basic. Discovering it is not, he must immediately determine an earlier basic, and so forth, until he is obviously on the scene of the basic engram. There are certain tests which he can apply. A basic engram will rise to laughter, sag slightly, and then rise to tone 4 and vanish. Successive engrams will then erase from that chain with very little work. Almost any engram on an engram chain can be exhausted. But if it is an engram lock and not a basic engram, it will recede and vanish at times, but will rise in part again when the basic engram has been reached and the preclear is brought forward into its area. An engram lock is subject to sag, which is to say that it may be brought to the 2.0 tone, but after a certain length of time has elapsed, from 1 to 2 days, it will be found to have sagged and to be, for instance, in a 1.1 tone. It can be successively lifted until it is apparently in a 3.0 tone, at which point much of its content will disappear. This is an alleviation. Any n-gram chain can be alleviated to some degree without reaching the basic. But when the basic has been reached, the basic itself and subsequent n-gram locks can be brought rapidly to tone 4, providing no n-gram locks are skipped on the return up the time track. When an n-gram chain has been brought to tone 4, it can be considered to have vanished, although while the pre-clear can no longer find it on the time track, he may even be unable to recall some of its most painful and disheartening aspects. The mind apparently has been proofed against the data it has contained. A search for an n-gram chain after it has been exhausted and a tone 4 has been achieved should, for purposes of auditing, be entirely fruitless. Once the basic has been discovered and the n-gram chain has been brought to tone 4, the locks will vanish of their own accord. If this does not occur, then there is something remaining, or the auditor has been too optimistic about the selection of his basic n-gram for the chain, and has not in reality discovered it. All n-gram chains should be exhausted from a pre-clear. These may be discovered to lie along the various dynamics, but any chain may influence more than one dynamic. Another type of n-gram is the cross n-gram. This is usually a childhood or adult n-gram, which embraces more than one n-gram chain. The receipt of the cross n-gram, containing as it does the convergence of two or more n-gram chains, is often accompanied by a nervous breakdown, or the sudden insanity of an individual. A cross n-gram may occur in a severe accident, in prolonged or severe illness under antagonistic circumstances, or, for instance, in a nitrous oxide operation. Cross n-grams are very easy to locate, but should not be addressed by the auditor as such, since an enormous amount of work upon them will not exhaust them until the basics and the n-gram chains on which the cross n-gram depends have been brought to tone 4. Post-battle neurasthenia is almost always traceable to the receipt of a cross n-gram. This must, of course, be an n-gram in its own right, as well as an n-gram lock on more than one chain. It is conceivable that an n-gram lock may be so severe that it breaks the individual, even if it lies on only one n-gram chain. There are certain rules the auditor may employ to establish the basic n-gram of an n-gram chain. In first entering a case, these rules apply as well to the first goal of the auditor, which is the location of the basic n-gram of the basic n-gram chain. 1. No n-gram will lift if the basic of that chain has not been lifted. 2. The basic n-gram will not lift until the basic instant of the basic n-gram has been reached, which is to say, the first moment of the n-gram. Ordinarily, this is the most obscure. 3. If after 2 or 3 test recountings of an n-gram it does not seem to be improving, the auditor should attempt to discover an earlier n-gram. 4. No n-gram is valid unless accompanied by somatic pain. This may be mild. Incidents which do not contain somatics are either not basics, the pain having been suspended by some such command as "can't feel" in the basic, or else it may not even be an n-gram. Cases should be entered as near as possible to the basic n-gram. Then, they should be returned to earlier incidents until the basic is discovered. The treatment of locks themselves may accomplish some alleviation of a case. In view of what can be accomplished by the treatment of n-grams, such a gain is not worth consideration by an auditor. Locks should be examined only to discover discrepancies of conduct, which will lead to some character of an earlier n-gram. Chapter 16. Dramatization. Dramatization is the duplication of an engramic content, entire or in part, in his present time environment by an aberree. Aberrated conduct is entirely dramatization. Aberrated conduct will occur only when and if an n-gram exists in the reactive mind of the aberree. That conduct will be a duplication of such an n-gram. The degree of dramatization is in direct ratio to the degree of restimulation of the n-grams causing it. A mild dramatization would be a similarity to the n-gram. A severe dramatization would be an identity with the n-gram. When his person is unwearied and he is well, and not directly menaced in his environment, the tone level of the entire individual possesses too great a differential from the tone level of the engram, which is always low on the tone scale. As the general tone of the individual approaches the tone level of the engram under restimulation, dramatization becomes more severe. The analytical mind is present to the degree that the general tone of the aberree is high. As this general tone lowers through ill health, reverses, or constant restimulation of the reactive mind, the analytical mind is proportionately less aware. Dramatization is demonstrated by the aberree in inverse ratio to the potential of the analytical mind. A geometrical progression is entered, as general tone lowers, to cause the analytical mind to lose its entire awareness potential. Since every engram contains, as the common denominator of all engrams, the unconsciousness of the organ which is the analytical mind, dramatizations bounce rapidly as this interaction progresses. In the presence of a relatively high analytical mind awareness potential, dramatization takes the form of similarity. The data of the engram is present, but is interspersed with or modified by justified thought. The physical pain, which is always present as part of the dramatization, is an equally mild duplication of the pain which was present during the engram. The awareness potential of the analytical mind reduces in the restimulation of the engram, which again reduces the general tone. The aberree is subject to almost continuous dramatization of one engram or another, as the re-stimulators appear in his vicinity, although the aberration may be so mild as to include only some chronically affected organ. Complete dramatization is complete identity. It is the engram in full force in present time, with the aberree taking one or more parts of the dramatis personae present in the engram. He may dramatize all the actors or merely one of them. His dramatization is identity, is unreasoned, and always entirely reactive. When the analytical mind reaches the low point of awareness potential it held during the engrammic incident, that point is also forced upon the aberree as a part of the dramatization. The aberree may also dramatize himself as he was at the moment of the engram's receipt. The words, physical actions, expressions, and emotions of an aberree undergoing an identity dramatization are those of the single or various dramatis personae present in the engram. An engram which can be dramatized may at any time in an aberree's future be dramatized as an identity dramatization when and if his general tone is low and his environment becomes infiltrated by restimulators. An aberree, because of high general tone and other factors, may not suffer the restimulation of an engram for a number of years after its receipt. A large number of engrams may be present and undramatized in any aberree if he has never been presented with their particular restimulators in an optimum moment for restimulation. The common denominator of all insanity is the absence of all, or almost all, awareness potential in the analytical mind. Insanity can be acute or chronic. Any identity dramatization is insanity, by which is meant the entire absence of rationality. The aberree commonly and chronically dramatizes locks. The engrammic content may compel or repress the aberree whenever restimulated. An irrational person is irrational to the degree that he dramatizes or succumbs to engrammic content in his reactive mind. The computations which can be made on the basis of dramatization are infinite. The reactive mind thinks in identities. Dramatizations are severe as they approach identities with the engrams, which force them into being in the conduct of the aberree. The auditor can profit in many ways by these principles of dramatization. By examination of the rage or apathy or hysteria patterns of the preclear, the auditor will find himself in possession of the exact character of the engrams for which he is searching. In the case of the manic, the fanatic, or the zealot, an engram has entirely blocked at least one of the purpose lines deriving from a dynamic. This engram may be called an assist engram. Its own surcharge, not the dynamic force, leads the individual to believe that he has a high purpose which will permit him to escape pain. This purpose is a false purpose, not ordinarily sympathetic with the organism, having a hectic quality derived from the pain which is part of it, even though that pain is not wittingly experienced. This assist engram is using the native ability of the organism to accomplish its false purpose, and brings about a furious and destructive effort on the part of the individual who, without this assist engram, could have better accomplished the same goal. The worst feature of the assist engram is that the effort it commands is engramic dramatization of a particular sort. And if the engram itself is restimulated, the individual becomes subject to the physical pain and fear which the entire experience contained. Therefore, the false purpose itself is subject to sporadic sag. This sag becomes longer and longer in duration between periods of false thrust. It is easy to confuse in casual observation an assist engram and an actual valid dynamic, unless one also observes the interspersed periods of sag. The assist engram may or may not occasionally accomplish something, but it does accomplish a confusion in the society that the dynamics of the individual are derived from his bad experiences. This is a thing which is emphatically untrue. Inherently, the individual has great willpower. This, however, can be aberrated. Willpower or its absence occasions the attitude of the aberree toward his reactive mind. The prevention of the dramatization of an engram or a lock further reduces the dynamic of the aberree. Chronic prevention lowers his general tone toward the breakpoint. Unhampered dramatization, as it contains restimulation of a physical pain and the reduced potential of the analytical mind, produces other harmful effects. Necessity can and does render inactive the entire reactive mind. Dramatization occurs most often in the absence of necessity, or when the reactive mind has obscured the presence of necessity. Dramatization is residual in the motor controls, including speech, and can be allayed by the physical exhaustion of the individual. The organism during dramatization tends to revivify toward the moment of the engram's occurrence. The engram containing, as one of its identity parts, the complete physical condition of the organism as at the moment of receiving the engram. There is no folly or facet of human activity which cannot be dramatized. An immediate alleviation can be achieved when addressing an aberree who is in identity dramatization by acting upon the fact that the conditions of auditing, with one exception, already exist, i.e., the pre-clear return to the moment of occurrence. Affinity may be established and Dianetic auditing begun at once. He can be persuaded to listen for the phrases he is uttering, and they can be alleviated by exhaustion on routine procedure. Chapter 17. Prenatal, Birth, and Infant Engrams. The human mind and the human anatomy are enormously more powerful and resilient than has commonly been supposed. Only incidents of the greatest magnitude in physical pain and hostile content are sufficient to aberrate a mind. The ability of the mind to store data can scarcely be overrated. In early life, before sound is analyzed as speech, a human being receives and stores exact impressions of everything which occurs. At some future date, when similar perceptics are encountered, the reactive mind reanalyzes, on the basis of identities only, the content of the early mind. This becomes the foundation of the post-conception personality. The actual personality in the individual is powerful and very difficult to aberrate. Unlike animals, which can be driven mad by minor mechanisms of experimental psychology, a man must be most severely handled before he begins to show any signs of derangement. That derangement proceeds from the ability of the reactive mind to store perceptions from the earliest moments of existence and retain them on either the analytical or the reactive plane for future reference. The basic personality does not proceed from engrams, and the dynamics of the individual are impeded, not enhanced by engrams. The dynamics are entirely separate and are as native to the individual as his basic personality, of which they are a part. Information falls into two categories: the educational, or experience level banked and available to the analytical mind on at least its deeper levels, and aberrational, or data stored in the reactive mind and often used by, but never reached by, the analytical mind, save through auditing. There would seem to be two types of recording. The first is cellular recording, in which the cells would seem to store data. In that cells in procreating become themselves again, which is to say that when cell A divides, both halves are still cell A. Cellular intelligence is not lost. Personal identity is duplicated. In the case of individual men, procreation is far more complex, and individual identity is lost. The son is not the father, but a genetic composite of vast numbers of ancestors. The cells of the human being shortly after conception are capable of enormous perceptive and retentive power. After a very short time in the womb, the brain and nervous system are already operating. From then until birth, the human being is apparently capable of computations of a rather complex nature on the analytical mind level. Far more certainly, he retains information on the reactive level. Fear, pain, and unconsciousness extend the range of perception of the individual. When the human being in the womb is injured, his senses extend so as to record sounds outside the mother's body. He records them so well that their precise nature is stored for future reference. The human being in the womb responds exactly as it does after birth to the receipt of engrams, storing the data with precision and reacting to it. The repair facilities available to a human being before birth are greatly enhanced by the presence of ample connective tissue, oxygen, and sustenance. These repair facilities are unimaginably great, so that a prenatal human being can be severely torn and ripped without becoming structurally deficient. It does, however, receive engrams, and these engrams are subject to restimulation. In many cases of attempted abortions, it was found that large sections of the prenatal human being's brain could apparently be injured without the brain being deficient or even scarred after birth. These repair facilities do not, however, lessen the extreme severity of the engrams which can be received by the prenatal human being. The word fetus is dropped at this point, and it is advised that it should be dropped from the language as a description of a pre-birth human being. Insufficient evidence is at hand to make an outright declaration that attempted abortions are responsible for the bulk of our criminal and insane aborrees. But according to the cases at hand, the attempted abortion must be accounted responsible for the majority. The attempted abortion is the most serious aberration producer. So exact is the recording of the pre-birth human being, or prenatal, that the reactive mind makes no errors in recognizing its enemies after birth. The mind becomes aberrated in having to depend upon these same enemies for the ordinary sustenance of life while the child is a helpless infant. The diagnosis of a prenatal case is relatively simple. Nearly all preclears will be found to have at least one prenatal engram, and the case will not solve unless that prenatal is reached and exhausted. The auditor can usually establish the attempted abortion preclear by an investigation of the conduct of the infant and child. Uneasiness or unhappiness in the home, a feeling of not being wanted, unreasonable fear and a strong attachment to grandparents or another non-parental member of the household are often signs of an attempted abortion. Fear of the dark is usually, but not always, a part of the attempted abortion case. The auditor should suspect an abortion attempt in every preclear he audits, at least for this next generation. Whether or not the preclear disbelieves the diagnosis is of no importance to the auditor, as the prenatal engrams may very well contain the words, "can't believe it." The parents themselves, as well as society, mislead the individual as to the enormous prevalence at this time of this practice. The attempted abortion preclear may not be discovered to be such until considerable auditing has already been done. Any auditing done on an attempted abortion preclear, unless it is solely addressed to making the case workable, is wasted until the attempted abortions are reached. The post-birth aborree presents a somewhat different case than the prenatal, since his case can be entered at any point, and the earliest moments of it can be attained easily. This is not true of the attempted abortion preclear. Attempted abortions may run to any number, since they are easily the most prevalent dramatization of engram in the society. They are repeated time and again. The auditor will find it necessary to unstack the prenatal period. He will ordinarily reach the latest prenatal injury first. As he finds and examines it, it places itself on the time track. By continuous returning to earlier and earlier attempts, More and more of these engrams are revealed, until at last the earliest is discovered. The auditor must be prepared to spend many hours of hard work in unstacking injuries. He will many times believe that he has reached the basic of that engram chain, only to discover that another type of abortion was attempted prior to that moment. He need not address these engrams for any length of time before he goes on to the earlier one. He should only get some idea of them, so that they will be easily locatable on the return. The basic engram on the attempted abortion case may be found shortly after the first missed period of the mother. Its emotion will be exactly that of the person or persons attempting to perform the abortion. The prenatal human being identifies himself with himself, but an adult, returned to the prenatal period, is reinterpreting the data and will find that he has and is confusing himself with other people associated in the attempts. This engramic data may have slumbered for years before it became violently restimulated, and may indeed never have been awakened. It must be removed, however, before a clear can be obtained. The auditor should be prepared to unstack 50 or more incidents before birth, if necessary. When he is at last in the vicinity of the basic, even the most skeptical preclear, one who has skepticism as part of the prenatal engram chains, will have no further question as to what is happening to him. The auditor should be prepared to encounter difficulty in the ability of the preclear to hear voices or feel pain, as it is quite common for the engramic content to contain such phrases as unconscious and can't see, can't feel, can't hear. This having been the misconception of the society regarding prenatal life. The auditor should never be appalled at the damage the prenatal human being has received, and so question the validity of his preclear's data. Unless the umbilical cord is severed or the heart is stopped, it is apparently the case that no damage, particularly in the earlier months, is too great for the organism to reconstruct. In that parents performing abortions are usually dramatizing attempted abortions which have been performed on them, rationality of content in the engrams should not be expected. Even the data given for it by the abortionists, father, mother, or professional, is often entirely inaccurate. The test of an engram is whether or not it will lift, and whether or not the somatics which accompanied it disappear and a tone 4 is obtained. Rearranging data into other sequences will not obtain this. The exact content must be brought out. If the prenatal human being's recording mechanism was so disturbed that it did not, at some period in the attempt, record, then there is no engram for the blank period only. But this is a theoretical case only. There has not been one yet discovered. The attempted abortion human being is often struck unconscious by the earliest part of each attempt, since the head is so available to the knitting needles, hat pins, orange wood sticks, button hooks, and so forth which are employed. These periods of unconsciousness must be penetrated, and will quite ordinarily release slowly. The number of prenatal engrams should not particularly appall the auditor, for when the basic has been discovered and a tone 4 achieved, the succeeding experiences will lift with greater and greater ease. The periods of unconsciousness interspersed between the prenatal engrams, being locks, will vanish. Birth is, in itself, a severe experience, and is recorded by the human being from the first moments of pain throughout the entire experience. Everything in a birth is engramic, since the human being conceives the ministrations to be more or less antagonistic, since they are accompanied by so much pain. A birth must be lifted as a matter of course, but not until the presence or absence of prenatals has been established. Even after birth has been lifted, prenatals should be looked for, since prenatals may often be found only after birth has been exhausted. The habits of obstetricians, the presence of sound and speech in the delivery room, the swabbing of an infant's nostrils, the examination of its mouth, the severe treatment administered to start its breathing, and the drops in the eyes may account in themselves for many psychosomatic ills. A cough, however, although it is present in birth and seems to be alleviated by the exhaustion of the birth engram, is quite ordinarily blood running down the throat of the prenatal during an attempted abortion. Any perception during birth, when difficulty is encountered with breathing, may become a restimulator for asthma. Clean, fresh air and electric lights may cause allergies and may be the principal restimulators. Everything said during birth, as well as everything said during prenatal engrams, is recorded in the reactive mind and acts as aberrational matter which can and does cause psychological and physiological changes in the individual. Because the parents are not greatly in evidence at birth, this experience may not be restimulated for many years. Prenatals, on the other hand, restimulate more easily. Infant life is very sentient. Delay in learning to talk is delay in learning the complexity of handling vocal muscles rather than a delay in ability to record. Everything in infant life is recorded, and the engrams received in it are extremely valid. The auditor will find himself dealing mainly with prenatal, birth, and infant life. The cases are very rare which have many important basics in childhood or adult life. These last periods contain mainly engram locks, which, though they must be addressed to create the clear, should not engage much initial attention on the part of the auditor. Most of the experiences of mental anguish in childhood and adult life are founded on very early engrams and are locks, which are self-removing. Moments of unconsciousness which contain physical pain and conceived antagonism lying in childhood and adult life are serious and can produce aberration. Engram chains complete with basic may be found, which will all by themselves exhaust. But little, if any, actual aberration comes after the 5th year is reached. Chapter 18. The Laws of Returning. By aberration is meant the pre-clear's reactions to and difficulties with his current environment. By somatic is meant any physical or physically sensory abnormality which the pre-clear manifests generally or sporadically in his environment, or any such manifestation encountered and re-experienced in the process of auditing. The aberration is the mental error caused by engrams, and the somatic is the physical error occasioned by the same source. The auditor follows the general rule that no aberrations or somatics exist in a pre-clear which cannot be accounted for by engrams. He may ordinarily be expected to discover that anything which reduces the physical or mental perfection of the pre-clear is engramic. He applies this rule first, and in practice admits no organic trouble of any character. Only when he has obviously obtained a clear, and when he has observed and medically examined that clear, after a period of 60 days to 6 months from end of auditing, should he be content to assign anything to organic origin. He cannot be expected to know, until the final examination, exactly what somatic was not engramic. In other words, he must persistently adhere to one line of thought, that the pre-clear can be brought to mental and physical perfection, before he resigns any mental or physical error in the pre-clear to a purely organic category. Too little is known at this writing of the recoverability of the mind and body for an auditor to deny that ability to recover. Since primary research, considerable practice has demonstrated that this ability to reconstruct and recover is enormous, far beyond anything previously conceived possible. Dianetics accounts for all faith-healing phenomena on an entirely scientific basis, and the auditor can expect himself to consort daily in his practice with what appear to be miracles. In addition to knowledge of his subject, considerable intelligence and imagination, and a personality which inspires confidence, the auditor must possess persistency to a remarkable degree. In other words, his dynamics must be phenomenally high. There is no substitute for the auditor having been cleared. It is possible for an individual to operate with Dianetics without having been cleared, and he may do so for some time without repercussion. But as he practices, he will most certainly encounter the perceptics contained in some of his own engrams, time after time, until these engrams are so restimulated that he will become mentally or physically ill. In psychoanalysis, it was possible for the analyst to escape this fate because he dealt primarily with locks occurring in the post-speech life. The analyst might even experience relief from operating on patients, since it might clarify his own locks, which are, and more or less always had been, completely available to his analytical mind. This is very far from the case with the auditor, who handles continually the vital and highly charged data which cause physical and mental aberrations. An auditor in Dianetics may work with impunity for a very short time only before his own condition demands that he himself be cleared of his engrams. While this is aside from the main subject of auditing, it has been too often observed to be neglected. Every engram possesses some quality which denies it to the analytical mind. There are roughly 4 types of denial. First, there is the self-locking engram, which contains the species of phrases, "Frank will never know about this," "forget it," "cannot remember it," and so forth. Second is the self-invalidating engram, which contains the species of the phrases, "never happened," "can't believe it," "wouldn't possibly imagine it," and so on. Third is the pre-clear ejection engram, which contains the species of phrases, "can't stay here," "get out," and other phrases which will not permit the pre-clear to remain in its vicinity, but return him to present time. The fourth is the pre-clear seizing engram, which contains the species of phrases, "stay here," "hold still," "can't get out," and so on. These 4 are the general types which the auditor will find to occasion him the greatest difficulty. The type of phrase being encountered, however, is easily diagnosed from pre-clear reaction. There are many other types of engrams and species of phrases which will be encountered. There is the self-perpetuating engram, which implies that "it will always be this way," and "it happens all the time." The auditor will soon learn to recognize them, forming lists of his own. An engram would not be an engram unless it had strong compulsive or repressive data contained in it. All engrams are self-locking to some degree, being well off the time track and touching it slightly, if at all, with some minor and apparently innocuous bit of information, which the analytical mind disregards as unimportant. Classed with the self-locking specific variety are those phrases which deny perception of any kind. The auditor will continually encounter perception denial, and will find it one of the primary reasons the pre-clear cannot recall and articulate the engram. "Can't see," "can't hear," "can't feel," and "isn't alive" tend to self-lock the whole engram containing any such phrases. As the engram is a powerful surcharge of physical pain, it will, without any phrases whatsoever, deny itself to the analytical mind, which, in seeking to scan it, is repelled by its operating principle that it must avoid pain for the organism. As has already been covered, there are 5 ways the organism can handle a source of pain. It can neglect it, attack it, succumb to it, flee from it, or avoid it. As the entire organism handles exterior pain sources, so does the analytical mind tend to react to engrams. There is an exterior world reaction of the organism to pain sources then. This is approximated when the analytical mind is addressed in regard to engrams. There is an excellent reason for this. Everything contained in the reactive mind is exterior source material. The analytical mind was out of circuit and was recording imperfectly, if at all, in the time period when the exterior source was entered into the reactive mind. An analytical mind, when asked to approach an engram, reacts as it would have had it been present, which is to say, out of circuit at the moment when the engram was being received. Therefore, an approach to the engram must be made which will permit the auditor to direct the pre-clear's analytical mind into but one source of action: attack. The actual incident must be located and re-experienced. In that the analytical mind has 5 possible ways of reacting to the engram, and in that the auditor desires that only one of these, attack, be used, the pre-clear must be persuaded from using the remaining 4. On this general principle can be created many types of approach to the problem of obtaining a clear. The one which is offered in this manual is that one which has met with quicker and more predictable results than others researched. It has given, in use, 100% results in obtaining clears. In the beginning, at this time, an auditor should not attempt to stray far from this offered technique. He should attempt to vary it only when he himself has had extensive and sufficient practice, which will enable him to be very conversant with the nature of engrams. Better techniques will undoubtedly be established, which will provide swifter exhaustion of the reactive mind. See Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, the complete handbook of Dianetic procedure. The offered technique has produced results in all types of cases so far encountered. There are 3 equations which demonstrate how and why the auditor in pre-clear can reach engrams and exhaust them. 1. The auditor's dynamics are equal to or less than the engramic surcharge in the preclear. 2. The preclear's dynamics are less than the engramic surcharge. 3. The auditor's dynamics plus preclear's dynamics are greater than the engramic surcharge. When the preclear's dynamics are entirely or almost entirely reduced, the auditor's dynamics are not always sufficient to force the preclear's analytical mind into an attack upon the engram. The auditor's dynamics directed against an engram in a preclear who has not been subjected to a process which will inhibit the free play of his reactive mind and concentrate it, ordinarily provokes the preclear into one of the 4 unusable methods of succumbing, fleeing, avoiding, or neglecting the engram. Demanding that the preclear face reality, or see reason, or that he stop his foolish actions, fall precisely into this category. The auditor's dynamics operating against a preclear can produce a break, temporary or of considerable duration, in the preclear. When the preclear is in reverie, some of his own dynamics are present, and the auditor's dynamics added to these make a combination sufficient to overcome the engramic surcharge. If the auditor releases his dynamics against the analytical mind of the preclear, which is to say the person of the preclear, while an attempt is being made to reach an engram, in violation of the auditor's code or with some erroneous idea that the whole person of the preclear is confronting him, the auditor will receive in return all the fury of the engramic surcharge. An engram can be dramatized innumerable times, for such is the character of the reactive mind that the surcharge of the engram cannot exhaust itself, and will not exhaust itself, regardless of its age or the number of times dramatized, until it has been approached by the analytical mind of the preclear. The additive dynamic law must be made to apply before engrams are reached. It is very occasionally necessary to change Dianetic auditors, for some preclears will work well only with either a male or a female auditor, or with one or another individual auditor. This will not be found necessary in many cases. 3 cases are on record where the preclear was definitely antipathetic toward the auditor throughout the entire course of auditing. The auditor was found to be a restimulator for one or more of the persons contained in the engrams. Even so, these people were cleared. Greater patience was required on the part of the auditor. Closer observance of the auditor's code was necessary, and a longer time was required for auditing. It will be discovered that once the preclear understands what is desired of him and why, his basic personality is aroused to the extent that it will cooperate with any auditor in order to be free. It will suffer through many violations of the auditor's code. Once a preclear has been entered upon auditing, he will ordinarily continue to cooperate in the major requirements to the fullest extent, no matter what apparent antagonisms he may display in minor matters. The fact that the auditor is interested solely in what has been done to the preclear, and is not at all interested in what the preclear himself has done to others, greatly facilitates therapy, since there is no social disgrace in having been an unwitting victim. The preclear is placed in a light state of concentration, which is not to be confused with hypnosis. In the state of alliance, therefore, the mind of the preclear will be found to be, to some degree, detachable from his surroundings and directed interiorly. The first thing that the auditor will discover in most preclears is aberration of the sense of time. There are various ways that he can circumvent this, and construct a time track along which he can cause the preclear's mind to travel. Various early experiences, which are easily reached, are examined, and an early diagnosis can be formed. Then begins an immediate effort to reach basic, with attempted abortion or prenatal accident predominating. Failures on the first attempts to reach prenatal experiences should not discourage the auditor, since many hours may be consumed and many false basics reached and exhausted before the true prenatal basic is attained. The auditor can use and will observe certain apparently natural laws in force. They are as follows. 1. The difficulties the analytical mind encounters when returned to or searching for an engram are identical to the command content of that engram. 2. A preclear in adult life is more or less obeying, as restimulated, the composite experiences contained in his engrams. 3. The preclear's behavior in returning is regulated by the commands contained in the engram to which he is returned, and is modified by the composite of chronologically preceding engrams on his time track. 4. The somatics of a preclear are at their highest in an engram where they were received, and at the moment of reception in that experience. 5. When returned prior to an engram, the commands and somatics of that engram are not effective on the preclear. As he is returned to the moment of an engram, the preclear experiences, as the common denominator of all engrams, a considerable lessening of his analytical potential. He speaks and acts in a modified version of the engram. All complaints he makes to the auditor should be regarded as possibly being verbatim from, first, the engram that he is re-experiencing, or second, from prior engrams. 6. At the precise moment of an engrammic command, the preclear experiences obedience to that command. The emotion a preclear experiences when returned to an engram is identical to the emotional tone of that engram. Excesses of emotion will be found to be contained in the word content of the engram as commands. 7. When a preclear is returned before the moment of reception of an engram, he is not subject to any part of that engram emotionally, aberrationally, or somatically. 8. When the time track is found to contain loops, or is blurred in any of its portion, its crossings or confusions are directly attributable to engrammic commands which precisely state the confusion. 9. Any difficulty a preclear may experience with returning, reaching engrams, perceiving, or recounting are directly and precisely commanded by engrams. 10. An engram would not be an engram were it easy to reach, gave the preclear no difficulty, and contained no physical pain. 11. The characteristic of engrams is confusion. First, the confusion of the time track. Second, the confusion of an engram chain, wherein similar words or somatics mix incidents. Third, confusion of incidents with engrams. This confusion is occasioned by the disconnected state of the analytical mind during the receipt of the engram. 12. Auditing by location and identification of hidden incidents. First, rebuilds at least the early part of the time track, locates and fixes engrams in relation to one another in time, and then locates the basic of the basic chain and exhausts it. The remainder of the chain must also be exhausted. The engram locks exhaust with ease after the erasure of the basic engram or the basic of any chain within that chain. Locks vanish without being located. A tone 4 gained on basic permits the subsequent erasure on the time track to go forward with ease. A whole chain may rise to 4 without the basic chain having been located. 13. Any perception of pre-speech life during returning connotates the existence of engrammic experience as far back as the time track is open. 14. If the individual's general tone is not clearly tone 4, if he is still interested in his engrams, another more basic chain than the one found still exists. 15. Engram patterns tend to form an avoidance pattern for the preclear. From basic outward, there is an observable and progressive divergence between the preclear himself and his return self. In the basic engram of the basic chain, and for a few subsequent engrams on that chain, he will be found within himself and receiving the experiences as himself. In subsequent engrams, cleavage is observable, and in late engrams, the preclear is found to be observing the action from the outside of himself, almost as a disinterested party. This forms the principal primary test for the basic of the basic chain. 16. Another test for basic is sag. Any engram may be exhausted to a point where it will recede without reaching tone 4. Although it is temporarily and momentarily lost to the individual and apparently does not trouble him, that engram which has been exhausted in a chain without the basic having been reached will sag or reappear within 24 to 60 hours. Basic on any chain will not sag, but will lift on a number of recountings, rise to tone 4, and will remain erased. 17. Another test for basic is whether or not it begins to lift with ease. If an engram does not intensify or remain static after many recountings, it can be conceived to be at least a basic on some engram chain. 18. Locks will lift and disappear without returning, as they are not fixed in the body by physical pain. Large numbers of locks can be exhausted, bringing an alleviation of the pre-clear's difficulties, and such a course may occasionally be pursued in the entrance of a case. The discovery and lifting of the basic to which the locks are appended removes the locks automatically. These rules and laws, unless modified in their statement, will be found invariable. Incompetent auditing cannot be excused by the supposed discovery of a special case or exception. A physical derangement must be in the category of actually missing parts of the organism to cause permanent disability, and instances of this are not common.